Well, hey, welcome back to the show. We are excited to be here today with a special guest named Luke Cirillo, and you're going to find out all about what Luke does. And I'm also excited to be here. My name is Gabe Kolstad from Westside Community Church, and joined by my buddy Oshua Hawthorne. How you doing, Oshua?
What's up, Gabe?
Good to see you. I heard you're in a church basement today.
Yep.
And you
Church of Portland. We call it our living room.
Okay, you were just being attacked by an aloe vera plant not long ago, and so I'm glad we're done with that.
Yeah, I don't have my lava lamp in the studio. I'm missing out on that, but we got some other hipster things around.
Very cool. Good to know.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, hey, we get the opportunity to meet a special person today named Luke Cirillo. How you doing, Luke?
I'm doing great. Yeah.
Very cool.
Thanks for having me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for being on.
Yeah.
And, in this kind of effort that we're undertaking to understand ministry, multiplication ministry, gospel ministry in the Northwest, you've got a really unique role. We're going to talk about that in a second, but why don't you first, why don't you first let us know a little bit about who are you, and tell us a little bit about your family and some of the personal life.
Yeah. So, I've been in Portland for Portland area, I'll say, for about 20 years. So I moved here when I started college, went to Multnomah University with that guy there, Mr. Oshua Hawthorne. I was intending to move into church ministry after that, and kind of did that a little bit. And then my wife and I just kind of realized that we needed a little bit of a break from explicitly church ministry. And so I stepped into nonprofit work at that point. And someone gave me a job posting for an abstinence presenter. And I was like,
everyone wants that job.
I was like, that sounds terrible. But the person who gave me the job posting misled me about how much it would pay. So I went to the interview actually it was a very compelling program. It was a program that we used to have here at First Image, and spoken about 30 different high schools in the greater Portland area about second relationships. And so that was a pretty cool opportunity to did that for a while. And anyway, so that's how I ended up here at First Image, and in this kind of ministry role. And then I'm married. My wife, Allison, and I now live outside the city. So we live in Molalla, actually. Okay. So I do a commute and do a thing. We have a farm. That's why we're out there. So that's another whole long story.
Wait, you got a farm? Just tell us a little bit about the farm.
Yeah. So we have pigs and chickens and ducks and sheep. Cool. About 20 acres outside Molalla, and kind of overlooking the valley. It's a beautiful spot.
That's neat. So, I'm just so curious, what led you to move out of the city into 20-acre farm?
Well, it didn't happen that way all at once. So it was kind of a progressive thing. We were actually looking at church planting in Portland, and we were kind of in process thinking about that. And like I said, we kind of needed to kind of figure some things out in our life and take a break from that. And at the same time, my wife kind of started getting into making food from scratch and going to farmers markets and these kinds of things, and got passionate about gardening and that sort of thing. And so one thing led to another. That's the short version of the story.
That's really cool.
We were for 10 years, we were in a smaller place in Oregon City. And then just about a year and a half ago, we moved out to a bigger place in Molalla.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
That'll be the second episode with Luke. Will be the hog farming one.
That's right.
Yeah. Hog farming with Luke. Okay, cool.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So tell us a little bit, you mentioned First Image. Tell us a little bit about your role there as an executive director, and what exactly is First Image?
Yeah. So First Image is a network of, life-affirming pregnancy and women's health clinics in greater Portland. So we have a clinic in Beaverton and Gresham and Southeast Portland, previously called Pregnancy Resource Center, previously called Crisis Pregnancy Center. So actually our clinics are called Ava Health, and we've been in the city since 1984. So we've been doing this work for actually quite a while.
Yeah.
So we offer basically for women who are facing unexpected pregnancy, especially those who are most at risk for abortion. We offer pregnancy tests, limited first and second trimester ultrasound, consultation with nurses, kind of like medical screening. and then also some like material support on the back end for those who decide to carry and things like that. So yeah.
That's amazing. I remember from the old days, because you guys are both from Multnomah University, me too, but just before you guys.
Yeah.
But when I was there, Joe Aldrich was there, and he once said about Crisis Pregnancy Center, he said he thought that was the most strategic ministry in the entire Portland metro area, which was an interesting comment from a guy like that. So very cool.
Yeah, I mean, pregnancy centers are interesting, and there's a lot of them. There's 3,000 of them across the country. Most of them are under separate boards. We have 3. A lot of the urban ones have a few more clinics under one board, but there are a lot of just like people all over. And I think it's one of the largest. It's probably one of the largest kind of like evangelical outreaches, like in an institutional form that actually really exists outside of church, parachurch, parachurch context in our country, really. So there's a lot of energy behind it. There's a lot of people involved with it. And yeah, it is a really unique place to sit, and strategic. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, before we jump into the deep end of the pool with Oshua here in a second, tell us just a little bit, like, how did you end up then becoming the executive director there? Like, what led you into that?
I kind of started half my story and then stopped, but so after there's a shelf life on talking to high schoolers about sex. So I was ready to leave at some point. And I was in the process of looking for other jobs, and actually the development director role was open at First Image, which is, a fundraising role, basically, to lead the kind of fundraising efforts, and not something I was interested in at all. But somebody kind of like pitched it to me in a way that was more compelling. And so I tried it out, took the job, and I actually loved it. So I did that for 8 years. And then a few years ago, our CEO decided to kind of move on. And so it was kind of a natural fit. And when I came into the work, I was really more passionate about like sexual brokenness and that kind of stuff. That's what I was doing. I wasn't involved in the pregnancy clinic side of things at all. So that kind of, not that I held that conviction, but it wasn't the main reason I was here. And so over time, that conviction deepened. And so it really has been a progressive thing for me, and also working through all of the things that I think people work through when they're wrestling with like doing this kind of work in this politically charged environment. And so there was all of that wrestling along the way. And each kind of point that I decided to stay and keep and do this work. And so, yeah, I've continued to enjoy it and love doing it. And, I'm honored to have kind of, stewardship of it at this moment. With an incredible team. Certainly not just me, but, So that's how I kind of got into it.
Well, thanks again for making time for this today. And I think we're ready to roll up our sleeves.
Let's do it.
All right.
Okay. So Luke, we've known each other for a while. We knew each other in college, and you've been doing some executive coaching for me. And I still remember really clearly, sitting down with you out at the park bench at Eastside Coffee, right near where your offices are. And it was right after the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. And there was some just significant kind of turmoil in the city over it, and some protests and some damage done. Take us back to those moments, and what was that like? What happened? How did you guys navigate all that?
Yeah. Basically, once the Dobbs opinion was leaked, and it was pretty clear that Roe was going to be overturned, which that happened in March, I think, of 2022, we started to see things happen. So the first big thing that happened was, and there was a lot of vandalism and things that happened across the country. We were the first to get hit, and we've gotten hit more than anyone else also. But the first thing that happened was all of the windows at our Southeast Center clinic were broken out. Wow. And some, hateful things were spray painted on the doors there. And following that, it all gets a little muddy over time because there was three major things that happened. That was one of them. And then that was in May. And then about a month later, before the Dobbs opinion actually came out, our Gresham clinic was firebombed. And so somebody threw an incendiary through one of the windows, and basically the building was a total loss. Structurally, it was still workable, but smoke, fire, all of that. So we actually just reopened about a month ago. It took like 15 months to rebuild that clinic. So that was a huge deal. And then the Monday after Dobbs actually was decided, a kind of mob of Antifa protesters came to our headquarters, which we share with Hinson Baptist Church offices. It's the Eastside Coffee Shop, kind of on 20th and Hawthorne is where we're at, and broke out all the windows on the Hinson side. And they didn't break out the windows on our side because we had boarded them up because we knew they were coming, and got them boarded up just in time. But they tagged the entire building pretty extensively, and we're here for a few hours protesting. So those are the three major incidents that took place. The aftermath of that was just our team kind of reeling from each of the incidents. There's fear there, people wondering if it's safe to come to work, and a lot of the online language was very violent. There was a group that took responsibility for at least a few of the incidents, the firebombing being one of them, and they were basically like, we're not going to stop until you're shut down. We're just going to keep hitting you, and until your insurers drop you, and nobody wants to support you anymore, and you're too scared to do anything. So that was really the explicit intention, and it was very clear and well written.
Wow.
And ludicrous, but anyway. So there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear there. And we just took it one day at a time. And, I think eventually things started to feel a little safer. We actually haven't had much happen since then. So the thing that happened at our headquarters was the last major thing to happen, which we're really thankful for. But we dramatically enhanced our security. A lot of things changed as a result of everything that happened. We put in better practices for like mental health and wellness for our team, and things like that. So, yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Luke. I imagine that was a really stressful time for you as a leader.
It was. Fun fact, I had just had my hip replaced. So I had my hip replaced like 2 weeks before that first incident happened. And so a lot of what I was managing from home, on my recovery bed, especially at first. So anyway.
Wow. Now, I wonder if you could help our audiences, maybe just to understand a little of what you see God doing from your chair in the city and in this, about the issue of life and abortion, because it's kind of left the news cycle.
Yeah.
And so we haven't really, unless you're in it, we don't really see so much of the effects. What are you seeing, what is a year and a half or so after that, the Roe v. Wade decision?
Yeah.
How has the landscape changed across the nation related to life and abortion, and just what do you see God doing?
Yeah. So, I'll kind of frame that starting with how things have changed with abortion, because I think it's a helpful place to start, which a lot has changed, and been trying to kind of get this across to people, even our own team, recognizing that no, things have really changed in a 5-year period because of the pandemic, because of trends before the pandemic, and then also because of Dobbs. So there's a lot of different moving pieces with it, but abortion is more easily accessible now. It's mostly done via the abortion pill. So the majority of abortions are done by the abortion pill, which happens really early in gestation. So typically 92% of abortions happen before 13 weeks. So they're typically happening pretty early in pregnancy and pretty quickly. So you don't even have to leave home really to access abortion now. You can, talk to a doctor online and get a prescription sent to you. And those things all kind of changed during the pandemic. But even before the pandemic, abortion was actually going up again, which it hadn't for 30 years. So 2018 was one of the first years where there was like a notable increase in actually the number of abortions that was taking place. Again, after like everyone kind of just thought it was going to just keep going down, 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 maybe plateau, but it kind of shifted. And so coming out of this last season where kind of Dobbs happened, and then we were looking at, okay, abortion is going to decline, and because of this, and that hasn't. The story is really actually quite complicated, but in short, the numbers did go down after Dobbs was decided, and what happened is that the legal regime in the country fractured, and so basically states just handled things differently than other places. So some states outlawed it or set new limits on it or something to that effect, which had a big impact in those states. But the states that did that are also the states that had the lowest numbers of abortions to begin with. So actually the abortion number overall is higher than it was before Dobbs. It's continued to go up, which was kind of obvious that would happen if the numbers continue to go up at all. You know, like there's definitely less abortions now because of Dobbs in those states where it's been restricted. But there is, it appears to be that there is also increasing numbers in those states where it's still open. Oregon is up by 33%, for example, over a few year period. I mean, that's kind of the reality, is that it's still a very urgent thing, and there are still, and it's more easily accessible anyway. So that, I think for us, we're just seeing like there's need, there's real need in our state, both for the life of preborn children and the women who are carrying them to be cared for well and loved well, that the kind of like anxiety around a pregnancy that is either unwanted or difficult, or circumstances are challenging, or father of the baby's not involved, or any of those things, like those circumstances haven't gone away. They haven't changed. Those realities haven't shifted. And so we, in terms of what God's doing, like we're feeling kind of the call to continue to step into that, and to do that intentionally and thoughtfully, and in a way that recognizes how things have changed. So we've changed because of that. We're trying to get to connect with those who are kind of like trying to decide about their pregnancy more quickly and earlier than we used to, because of how fast everything happens now. We have a more medical emphasis than we used to. Hence the change in our clinics from Pregnancy Resource Center to Ava Health is more of an orientation towards pregnancy and women's health. And so women who are pregnant deciding what they need to do are more focused on their medical needs and next steps, and getting trusted information from medical professionals. And so that's kind of where we want to be. We want to be offering that kind of information and support and care. It's medically professional information and practices and services. We've been a medical clinic for 20 years. I don't think people usually realize that, because the resource center thing feels a little different than that, which was another reason that we kind of made that shift. But we are a medical clinic, and that is the kind of information that we're providing, but we try to do it in a very holistic way, Jesus-centered way. Like Jesus is still very much a part of the process for us and how we do it, which is another element, I think, of what God does in these kinds of moments where someone comes in the midst of a crisis or challenge like this. There's just like just a ton of openness to talking about not just pregnancy, but everything, including spiritual life and all of that. So we find it to be a really fruitful place to be able to sit, is there with those women and men occasionally.
Yeah. That's great. Wow. Now, for our podcast, most of the audience are church leaders. Yeah. And so I'd be curious if you would share to them, like what that about the communities you serve. What do you wish the church knew, or how would you communicate to the church about these communities?
Yeah. That's a good question. So the people that we serve, the communities that we serve, are So I'll go back to the kind of person who is typically like needing the sort of services that we're offering. I think sometimes we imagine that it's like a white teenage girl, like who accidentally got pregnant and is afraid to tell her mom or dad and is looking for an abortion somewhere. That does happen sometimes like that, but actually the vast majority of the people we serve are quite diverse. So, Hispanic, African American, and makes up a lot of the people that we serve, especially in Beaverton and Gresham, and also in Southeast Portland, and tend to be lower income and kind of we offer free. Everything we do is for free. Like all of our services are free. And so people who are coming with economic need too, to be able to receive some services that are valuable to them at no cost is a really big deal. And those are kind of the people that we're serving too. And they often come from more broken kind of family situations. So less present father of the baby. That's a huge deal. That's kind of one of the biggest single factors in all of this is just kind of where the relationship status is at. With the father. So yeah, that's who we're serving is broken families who are struggling economically, who are diverse in our city, in a city that's not terribly diverse, but we're kind of in those pockets a little bit. So that's
wow.
And typically mid 20s is like typical.
So then how can the churches in Portland better serve that community? Would you say, like, what would make a church on a Sunday morning or a small group or some church outreach be more welcoming to that community?
My answer to that is always like being the kind of place where those kinds of people can be. I think we often have people who want to connect to a church after we've served them and walk with them. And so we try and do those handoffs. We try and do those warm handoffs. Churches are not often prepared to receive people that A, they don't know, and B, have a higher need threshold than their average congregant. So creating the kind of environment where like that's just part of the culture, I think is probably the single biggest thing. There's other things like get proximity to the people who have these kinds of issues. But I think just a really basic thing is like pay attention to who's there. I mean, the needs are already there. Like people are already are already suffering in the community. So like care for the people you have really well. Do that first. Be that kind of church, and then extend that kind of life to other people who are also broken. And I think that extends to other ministries in the city too. It's like, it's not just us. Be the kind of church that someone from Union Gospel Mission can move right into, that's a thing. That's a big thing. So.
Wow. Is that something that a church leader could reach out to First Image and say, hey, we want to be the kind of place that folks that come to you, receive services, and then say, hey, I'd like to find a church? Yeah. Can churches come to you and say, hey, we would love to take care for some of these people, partner with you, help us do that better? Is that something that we can just reach out to you?
Totally. Yeah, we love having that conversation. Yeah, we're kind of always having that conversation with churches, and we're working actually more explicitly on our spiritual follow-up too. So like we open the context for we open a spiritual conversation with our patients if they want it, which they pretty much always do. And so we open that conversation, and then we also ask them if they want that to go further. And so we're in the process of kind of building out like, what does it look like to take that further? We're using some of the alpha stuff and things like that to kind of build out like, how do we take these conversations with people who have really no spiritual context, even though they're open and interested. And that kind of linkage with churches, I think, is a really great place to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other things that you would say to churches? I mean, I'm kind of my context. I've been in some churches that make like sanctity of life just a really big issue, and others that it feels like it's crickets and they just don't talk about it. Are there other things ways you see the church engaging? You're like, oh, that's really like that's working in the city. Some really good models, or even some things to avoid where you're like, oh, it really hurts our cause when you do that. Stop doing that, please.
Oh gosh, I don't know if you want me to get into that conversation.
No, this is super relevant. Tell us some cringe stories.
Okay, I'll give one story that's cringy on maybe the other side, which is we had a church who wanted to take a Sunday, and hadn't done this in many years, to talk about sanctity of life and to highlight the ministry of First Image. This is a large church in our city. And they took 6 months to kind of like think about how they were going to do that. And then at the end decided not to do it because it was too hard to have that conversation in a way that didn't feel political. At the end of the day, like they just felt like it was going to potentially blow too many things up. So to me, if I ask the question, like, how does a church step into this kind of conversation, which I absolutely think they should, just like any other hard issue. Like, I'm one of those guys who's like, anything you don't talk about, you're subcontracting to the culture. So like, if you avoid race, and you avoid, abortion, and you avoid, sexual identity, if you avoid any of these things, someone else is not avoiding it. And so it's their YouTube feeds, and, it's the algorithms, and it's all that stuff that then shapes them and how they think about it. And then you end up with this kind of like Frankenfaith, where you have these like political ideologies tacked on to the side of like central Christian conviction. So I say, first, you have to have the courage to speak to those things. And second, you need to do it with Christian conviction and not political ideology. And so sometimes Christian conviction has political implication when we're trying to love our neighbor. That's just facts. Oftentimes, though, the engagement with politics and political ideology works backwards on Christian conviction and ends up kind of reshaping what we would actually say or how we would actually say it. So with abortion, to me, it's a super easy thing to talk about because the image of God is easy to talk about. The image of God is like this central Christian conviction that bleeds into everything that we do. Preborn children are just one implication of that. And it's a conviction that we all typically, most evangelical, broadly speaking, evangelical Christians kind of like share this conviction, that, we think that every person conceived is created in the image of God. So if that's a thing that we believe, then I think, need to be helpful to the people that we're called to serve and helping them to be able to live out that conviction in a way that's going to be meaningful in their life, in their context, with their friends and family. Like, this is not like a go get on the street corner kind of thing. Most of the time, it's a start at home kind of conversation, because there are people who are struggling, right? In our families, in our neighborhoods, in our churches. So holding that like value for life is, it's a comprehensive thing to do,
So Luke, I mean, you've been talking about a little bit about politics, and I think a lot for me as a pastor of a church, there are a number of issues that are sensitive, right? And I think one of the things that does hold churches back from dealing with issues is just fear. Particularly in a city or even a metro area like Portland, everything is just heightened. The stakes are really high for communicating well. And, you just said that conversation, it maybe is something that should start at home, not necessarily on the street corner. But how would you advise pastors to communicate about these things without making it political?
Yeah.
Because that's, I understand kind of where you're going with it, but do you have any examples of, ways to communicate about this in a way that don't create lines in the, where you're dividing people?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just say that this is actually a really complicated question to answer, really. And, because I don't know that a lot of pastors have really thought through their own philosophy and theology of politics. And so it's not as simple as like, it's a thing that we mostly avoid thinking about, and we have our own kind of thoughts and feelings, but not something that we make really explicit. So pulling my own theological veil back just a little bit, I think that the kingdom of God is itself a political reality. It's a kingdom, and so how that kingdom intersects with the other kingdoms that we exist in is this fundamental question that pastors, I think, need to be clear about, because that's the part that people get stuck in. It's not necessarily, I don't think it's one issue or another issue. I think it's actually that higher level. How do I think about the way I exist as an American citizen, but a citizen of the kingdom of God? Mm-hmm. If that conversation hasn't been opened in your church, then talking about any specific political issue is going to be near impossible. You're always going to be chasing. You're always going to be following the congregation around. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important place to start. And so I mean.
So assuming that is okay, let's assume that for church where that has been kind of embedded in terms of a philosophy. We are first citizens of heaven and God's kingdom, and then we are secondarily citizens of the world, and obviously called to live in peace and all of those things. But okay, so what's a kind of conversation that a pastor could have about this from the stage? That would invite the right kind of dialogue and the kind of, either on the plus side, what we could do, or on the negative side, what we should avoid.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's see here. I think on the plus side, I think that giving people a framework for them to discern how to live out their particular conviction. And what I mean by that, I know I kind of already said that, but what I mean by that is, if you're a person who's really convicted about the reality of abortion, and you have a particular way that you think that should work out in love for our neighbor, and you have a stewardship in the context of your citizenship as an American, which is all true. We do have a stewardship as citizens of this particular place, and we hold certain convictions. I think where people get hung up is when there's too much specificity on exactly how you should apply that politically. So you should vote for this person. You should not vote for this person. You should support this ballot measure. You should not. Mm-hmm. You should not do this. I think that short circuits sometimes people's thoughtful engagement with what does loving our neighbor really look like in this.
Yeah. And I think it also really perpetuates the divide between the world and the church, because the world is looking at the church as a bunch of brainless people that are, following some edict a lot of the time. So I think you're right about that. I like where you're going with that.
Totally. Yeah, totally. So, and I think on the negative side, I think being able to help people see where it's really political ideology and not Christian conviction that's driving what they're thinking and doing. And sometimes that shows up in how do I think about what my responsibility is, so what is the thing I'm first responsible for, second responsible for, third responsible for, so again, I'm kind of thinking about the concept of subsidiarity, do the things that you have most influence over first and de-emphasize the things in a way that you don't have as much influence over. So for me, the presidential vote every 4 years is one of the least consequential things in my mind compared to everything else I have stewardship for, especially because I live in Oregon and my vote doesn't matter. rubbing some people the wrong way there, but that's me. That's my conviction is I have other work that's more important for me to mainly focus on. So what's going to get my attention? And that is like, it is kind of a stewardship of teaching people to have a certain kind of stewardship of attention, because politics sucks your attention. Like it's just like we're 2 years out or whatever, or a year. I don't even know how far out we are for the presidential election. I don't care. It's a year and a half or something. A year. Yeah. Yeah. It's just a year, isn't it? Wow. Okay. So, but it's like the news cycle, right? Like everyone kind of like immediately is focusing on that, and so much energy, attention. And that attention is almost a kind of prayer. And so I think it's also just like helping people to direct their prayers, in a I don't know, healthier way or more productive way. Or again, not to say that those things don't matter. Like I think they matter. It's a matter of emphasis for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I hear you saying about like, how then do Christian leaders, pastors of churches, maybe specifically in my case, talk about this? I think I hear you saying we integrate it into our conversations about discipleship and mission.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The root of that is, I love the word stewardship that you're using, stewardship of God's kingdom and our role in it, and how that impacts a city. And so that's a really well said stuff. Thank you, Luke, for sharing those things.
Yeah.
But Luke, if there's a pastor or church leader listening to this and they're feeling some conviction, they're like, wow, I've been out of fear. I've been neglecting, to mobilize and equip my church to serve the preborn and this community, and to speak about this important social justice issue. Are there some tools or some suggestions you could give them from where to get started, where to take baby steps in this way?
I think this kind of depends. I like books, but so that's, we all do, right? But this kind of depends on where you're starting from a little bit. Like if you're needing more grounding philosophically or theologically, I think some of Nancy Pearcey's work is really phenomenal on this score, just like personhood and all of that kind of stuff. I think for some of the more like, I'm trying to figure out, like how to navigate the political landscape. There's some like people I really respect who I think are doing that well. People like Russell Moore and David French, and like I really like the way those guys are kind of approaching things personally. So there's that. And then the other thing I would say is just talk to other pastors. So one of the things that we did a few years ago is we started gathering pastors together in these groups. And basically there was one question, and it was, how do we be faithful to Jesus in this particular cultural moment? And so let's talk about all the things. I think part of what's scary is like, I don't know what other people are doing. I don't know how I should think about this. I don't know how it's playing out in other churches exactly. So just getting that insight and actually brainstorming a little bit with one another about how to approach it. I think with things as important as this and as easy to mess up, like talk to other people. And then that also becomes a way to kind of network and connect around not just this issue, but others. So
that's great. It's super helpful.
I love too about this conversation is you're inviting church leaders to connect with what you're doing so that we can be a part of continuing that discipleship from within First Image into involvement in the body of Christ. So I hope our listeners are hearing that. And maybe one of the things you could do that'd be helpful for us as we get ready to wrap up is tell us like, well, how do we get involved, and specifically, how do we get in touch with somebody at First Image that can help us with that? Yeah,
well, you can reach out, like all the ways of volunteering, those kinds of things, like supporting just first-image.org. That's our website.
Say it again.
first-image.org.
Okay.
Not dash, actual dash, not spelled out. Yeah.
Right.
first-image.org. Yeah. And then I actually do think, and I try and say this all the time, like I actually think one of the most helpful things that churches can do for the mission is to just start talking about things more. talking about these kinds of things and stepping into these conversations. Some churches do, most churches aren't. And so I think that kind of can help to lay the groundwork for being able to make these kinds of connections more deeply and get people engaged with what's happening. There are some cool ways to get involved and to volunteer, and also just to support and, give and love the people that we're serving that way. So.
Very cool. And how about you personally? How do we get in touch with you if somebody would like to? My email, I answer it. I'm not one of those people who only answers their email once a month. So Luke at first-image.org. Yeah. Okay. Feel free to reach out. Very cool. Luke, thank you so much for spending time with us and just helping us to kind of get our minds around a very important subject. And I hope that if you're a church leader listening in any capacity, any kind of gospel-centered leader listening, that that you'll take a minute, maybe share this with somebody that you think it'll bless. And we just thank you again for hanging out with us for this episode.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.